Hello?
Hey.
Anybody here?
I think we're all here.
What's going on?
Not too much. I'm trying a new view, different perspective from my house, get a little change of pace for everyone.
Traveling. Nice.
That's right.
I'm just giving 1 second while I get everyone else into here. A bunch of people joining in right now. Anybody here?
I think we're all here.
What's going on?
Not too much. I'm trying a new view, different perspective from my house, get a little change of pace for everyone.
Traveling. Nice.
That's right.
I'm just giving 1 second while I get everyone else into here. Adam, your mic is feeding back. I just muted you. All right, a couple more people joining. Just give it another minute here.
Problem solved. I had it on Facebook as well.
Perfect.
And if we go off of that, then
That would make sense.
still go live. I'm like so not a tech person, like at all.
Don't worry, it's a click of a button to go Facebook Live.
Yeah.
All right.
Ooh, looks like your cat's trying to make another appearance there, Rachel.
No, he can't help himself. He can't help himself.
I'm going to share my screen over here. You guys see that?
Yes.
Cool. Just give it 1 more sec. I'm just waiting on, still got people coming in from the waiting room. All right, 30 more seconds. And we'll get
Anticipation's killing me, Brian.
I'm usually like a couple minutes late to meetings, so I just want to make sure I get everyone in here. Up. All right. Well, let's get into it. I'm sure some more people will join. Today we have a riveting presentation on zoning bonuses here in the city of Philadelphia. We have the experts to talk about it. We have the Pritzker Law Group, Adam and Rachel, and obviously myself and Scott from Designblendz. Scott's the Director of Architecture, and I play the role as CEO. Going to start off just to kind of give an update. We're trying to get better at this each week. Rach, you just want to give a little intro of what's coming next week?
Yeah, so next week, the same time, 2 o'clock, we are going to have Councilman Alan Dom, and we are going to be just doing kind of an open Q&A with him, getting kind of his take on the lay of the land. As a lot of people know, not only is he a city council member, but he owns a lot of businesses and restaurants and also real estate. So wanted to get his take on what's going on. And so submit questions that you have ahead of time to the link there and get your questions answered. And then the second part of our conversation is just going to be an open Q&A with the experts. So any zoning questions, architecture questions, legal questions, besides maybe relationship questions, don't ask, but those kind of questions.
Yeah.
We're going to take anything and everything. So in addition to your questions for Alan, you can also submit on the form that Brian has for additional questions for us, or write it on Facebook or email us or whatever.
Great. All right. Should we get into it?
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Rach, you want to give updates?
Adam's going to jump in.
Yeah, I'll take this one. So right now, as it says, the Zoning Board of Adjustment has officially extended its cancellation period for the first 2 weeks of May in correspondence with other city agencies. Essentially, that means that they're not taking any appeal applications and no hearings are happening. You can still submit for refusals to move forward, keep your projects moving forward. But again, that's basically where the stopping point is going to be. As far as the RCO planning commission process, RCOs being registered community organizations, for those not familiar, we have reached out to them. They understand the concerns. that, people aren't able to move their project forward. At the same time, they're also, concerned about making sure the process is as genuine as possible. And with these virtual meetings, they are looking at that as a possibility. However, it's kind of a mixed review. That being said, we've talked about how different RCOs have different levels of technology available and experience. So we'll continue to monitor that. But right now, there's been no changes to that, just kind of discussions on that. As far as courts are concerned, while you still can e-file, and people are getting some dates in the future for scheduling, right now, they've actually extended the closure of the courts physically until May 29th. So that's kind of a departure from other places that are starting to look at stuff in the state from May 8th. But I think it's because the volume in Philadelphia for these cases that, for now, the safety of the public and how large it is, that we're going to keep that closed until May 29th as a city. Construction sites. So originally yesterday we had this as they were going to begin May 8th, and now we've changed it to May 1st. I know some of us who are part of the BIA received some word that some places may open on May 1st within the state as far as construction. That being said, and you can see it says guidelines to come. That's because they haven't really done anything definitively or told us anything definitively about who's going to open, what's going to be allowed. So again, we'll keep our ears to the ground on that. But right now it's kind of, it's possible it's going to open May 1st, and we're expected to get some guidelines, but as Philadelphia is concerned, we don't really know that much, along with the rest of the state. And then I just wanted to speak a little bit about some of the small business stuff I'm hearing about. A lot of people submitted for the payroll protection program, only to find out that the funding was already absorbed by either larger groups or just other businesses in general, and the fund ran out within 2 weeks. So I was speaking with some of my financial consultants, colleagues, friends, and they're saying that the Senate had passed a $310 billion extended relief fund. So that's additional money. $250 billion of that is going to be unrestricted, meaning that it's going to go to any banks. But this time around, they're actually designating $30 billion of it to community banks, with either $10 billion or $50 billion in assets, sort of like this mid-size and a little bit larger small business. But they're doing that because a lot of people went to their local banks to find out that they were kind of shut out. So again, I think that means, obviously there's going to be huge demand. I think the House will probably approve it today. So it could go up as the funding as soon as tonight, but likely tomorrow. And with that being said, demand's going to be high. And so, I would this time reach out to your local banks if you have them, because there will be assets specifically assigned to them. So that's the updates of the week.
Great. Cool. And then moving forward a little bit, we have a new ritual that we're going to do here. This is the picture of the week. Courtesy of Rachel for Adam Pritzker, a little update. But the new picture.
Adam wasn't on the tail end of our call yesterday, so we just decided we would add this.
Nice. Nice.
Good. So this is a perfect segue into bonuses. So, Rach, I think you're starting this one off, or who's starting this one?
Yeah, well, I can do it. Adam and I talked about him doing it too. This is just the intent of bonuses. Pretty obvious. Encourage certain types of development, income-driven development, green building practices, to create amenities for the public, whether it be for parking or art inclusion or LED and green roof. Other facts about bonuses: not all zoning classifications qualify. Some do, some don't. We're going to talk about RM1 to CMX2.5. We will have a later segment with CMX 3, 4, 5, and IRMX. And also some, don't qualify at all. A lot of the lower density residential don't qualify. Some of the pure, like the industrial, don't qualify. So you just want to keep an eye out, but we're really targeting RM1 to CMX2.5, which is kind of the most common right now.
The big thing to remember with the zoning bonuses is just like, these are things that the city is striving for, whether it's affordable housing or sustainable design, or they want to see parking in a certain place, or more public art, public space. You know, you got to give something, whatever that may be. You know, and then the city's going to give you something back theoretically.
Yep. And this, what Rachel took is right out of the code. So for this slide, so, you know, you can see it's obviously, it's not speaking to a specific group or community, but like this is Philadelphia sort of initiatives is what we can take from that.
So if I'm just, you know, I'm a new developer, I guess what I'm taking away from this is the city provides these bonuses to help them achieve certain goals. Is that?
Yeah, and they're mostly height and density and floor area ratio bonuses. So it's to be able to build bigger and badder, as we call it. And obviously there's a give on the city's end. We'll let you do this if you meet these requirements, obviously. And then also if there's some sort of a greater good in a sense, and we'll talk about for specific bonuses, you know, what the city's balance has been on that.
Cool. All right. So the different types of bonuses, RM1 to CMX 2.5.
Yeah, types of bonus, floor area bonuses, height bonuses, unit density bonuses. And then obviously today we're talking about the three main ones that we see mostly in RM1 to CMX2. The green roof density bonus, which obviously allows for density, 25%. The fresh grocer height bonus, which allows for height and density actually. Scott will get into stacking them. So sometimes if you use one, you can't use the other. But fresh grocery, you can do height and density. And then mixing home housing bonus is also a height and density bonus for CMX 2.5 and RM1. And again, for some of the other zoning classifications, there's some other inclusions.
Great. So when to bonus and when not to bonus?
So best prospects. I threw this in here just because it's NFL draft today. Big day. You know, I'm a Dolphins fan, as you can see.
Scott, we didn't need that. Nobody needed to hear that.
No one cares that you're a Dolphins fan.
I'm very excited. Very excited. We got a lot of picks. So best prospects, there's certain properties I think that lend themselves more to these bonuses more than others. These are really just the top 5 things that, you know, as an architect, like I look at as things that fit well and good availability for a zoning bonus. The first one's actually a little bit more development driven, where the property is in a high price neighborhood. And basically what that means is, you know, you're going to be paying somewhat of a premium to get either a height or a density bonus. Those are consistent throughout the entire county of Philadelphia. So if you're in a higher price neighborhood, necessarily, you're going to get more efficiency out of what you're paying in or what you're adding to that. And we can kind of get into that a little bit later, and where those make sense and where they don't. Corner properties are also a great one, just because you have the availability to build more building on those properties regardless. So it's 80% versus a typical 75% on a quarter property. So right off the bat, you're already building more. So if you can stack extra density, those units are going to be nicer no matter what. 4-story buildings, similar kind of thing. You know, really when we get into density, your building doesn't really increase, but having the amount of building that can allow the extra density within that building to be nice units is always key. Lots over 15,000 square feet. This is kind of a no-brainer, because if you're doing a green roof density bonus and your lot's already over 15,000 square feet, you're going to have to do stormwater management. You can satisfy part of that stormwater management cost with a green roof on your building. So those costs really align, and you really just get a bonus at that point. So, you know, it's kind of killing 2 birds with 1 stone. And then small units. You know, this is something too that goes hand in hand with kind of the amount that you're building and what density you're increasing by. So the thing to remember with some of these bonuses are that they don't really allow you to build more building. They really allow additional density within your building. So if you're having the same amount of building that you would for a buy right scenario and you get more density, your units get smaller. Again, some areas that's attractive, some areas it's not. But really, if small units are moving in an area, you know, where you're developing, then you should definitely start to look at bonuses.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in and say, this question, when to bonus, when not to bonus, this is really where, your law and design professional team can help you determine, A, what are you eligible for? How can you maximize that potential? What the costs are going to be? And then ultimately, if it makes sense, just based on either your project, or not either, but both your project and also the area in which you're placing your project. So these are the kind of things teams like us can help out with.
All right, let's dive into the green roof bonus a little bit. Who wants to be the expert on the green roof bonus?
Not it.
I can take this one as well. Green roof density is an additional 25% extra density. The big things to remember about what
your microphone is like Darth Vader, man.
Yeah, you got to turn off your Darth Vader voiceover.
That just means that you're in a green roof.
Cool. Rich, you want to take it while he fixes his mic?
Sure. So the green roof density bonus permits an additional 25% extra densities for properties that meet the requirement. Well, what are the requirements? The dwelling units are located in a building with a green roof. I think that's obvious. And then the building has to meet one of the two requirements. If it's new construction, there has to be a minimum of 5,000 square feet of earth disturbance. So if your lot is 2,000 square feet, 3,000 square feet, the odds of having 5,000 square feet of earth disturbance is probably not likely. So that'll be important to evaluate. And then for existing structures or an expansion of existing structures, the building, it requires a minimum building footprint of 5,000 square feet. So these are generally for larger sites. Obviously, doesn't necessarily mean that's like more moderately sized sites don't make sense. But again, with the amount of earth disturbance you have to have, you're generally not seeing these on your typical small RSA 5, small RM1s. If either you do an appendage and we consolidate lots to get there, or again with existing structures. Some of the other qualifications are that the roof has to be covered 60% by a green roof. I know Adam and I can tell you from experience in visiting a bunch of sites that the amount of landscaping, detail, beautification that's required is not really, it's not laid out in a really stringent manner. So we've seen green roofs that are like amazing and immaculate. And then we've seen ones where we're like, that's a green roof because it just looks like a bunch of weeds. So the requirement is just that 60% be covered with green roof. That meets the water department design standards, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to provide this beautiful garden oasis always. It's important to note too, you can't use this density bonus to qualify for reducing landscaping for parking lots. Obviously that was a question that people got, that they put that right in the code. And again, this is available for RM1 CMX2 and CMX2.5. It obviously is available for other zoning classifications that we're not discussing. But again, remember the basic thing is, am I going to disturb 5,000 square feet of earth disturbance? If the answer is yes, then you move forward with sort of a cost analysis with your legal and your design team to figure out, does this make sense for my project? And I think once Scott gets his technology working, he'll talk to us about how we calculate this and how we stack some of these as well.
Yep.
Well, is my microphone working?
Yeah, you're good. Clear.
Okay, that's great news. So just real quick about earth disturbance, because it's the most important thing to realize when you're looking for this. Earth disturbance does not equal lot area. They are different things. So if you have a 4,800 square foot lot, you most likely will still have over 5,000 square feet of earth disturbance. Earth disturbance is anything that you're impacting during the building process. So the sidewalks you're replacing, any sort of utilities that you're running into the street, all of those areas count towards your earth disturbance. And that's something that your civil engineer will be showing to Philadelphia Water Department when they put in the submission for the green roof density bonus, as well as your ERSA plans, which most likely you'll also have to do. When thinking about existing buildings, think of that the same way. So if you have an existing building and you're not really doing anything to that building and it's 6,000 square feet, you won't apply. You pretty much have to, whatever you're demoing of that existing building would count towards earth disturbance. but whatever you're keeping does not count towards that.
Any thoughts on why that is? So it's not, so you can't really do an adaptive reuse to get, new bonuses. You couldn't take an existing warehouse, slap a roof, green roof on it to get additional density.
Correct.
Mhm.
Correct. You would have to be disturbing the actual earth with basically foundation. So anything that you're putting new foundation on, or you're replacing the sidewalk, those things would count towards earth disturbance.
Great. All right, cool. Well, let's keep rolling. Oh, look, a little calculation.
Hmm.
Little mathematician stuff we got to do.
Math is fun.
It's easy.
Rachel's favorite. Rachel's great at math.
This is how I do math. Hey, Scott.
So
Wow,
Scott,
I don't get any props.
Yeah, well, Adam too, but usually you're busy and don't want me to bother you.
this math looks pretty easy. When all the numbers started getting imaginary,
Yeah.
that's where it lost it for me.
Yeah, so this is the actual equation that is generated based on the zoning code requirements, what it looks like necessarily. This is a real project. We did this project in West Philadelphia. It's on 39th and Lancaster is the project. It's built, it's complete, it's good. CMX2 property. This is one of those cases that was actually under the 5,000 square feet lot area, as you'll see. But because we're on a corner, a pretty large corner, we qualified just over the 5,000 square feet and got the 25% density bonus. So you'll see the lot area minus the 1919 divided by 480. That comes straight from CMX2 on how the density is calculated. Plus the 3 units there, which is calculated for the 1919. Times it by 1.25 or the 25%, and that gets you 10.69. Always round down. Everything that you have to do has to round down.
Yep.
So
Even if it's 10.88 or 10.95, they look rounded down. That's what the code says.
Yep. So
Sometimes
make sure you realize that.
Sometimes if you're close, like you're really close, and you're trying to do affordability or something, it may be worth talking variance for the additional units you could get. It just will depend, obviously, but as a rule of thumb, round down. But again, if it's close, we've done cases where we've gotten extra units based on how close it's been, and that's sometimes been a decent
Sure. Number. It's just that as of right, you're not going to be able to do it. Yeah.
Correct. Always round down.
Mm-hmm.
A good question. Do you round down before multiplying by 1.25 or after?
Before.
So before.
Yep. So you take your unit counts. That's your unit count. You round down and then you multiply it by the density bonus. So everything's a round down conversation.
Perfect.
So you get your unit count and then you multiply that rounded down unit count by 1.25.
Great. All right, let's keep rolling. How about the process?
Love the photo. Photo. Gotta throw some
getting
sports
better
in here.
He wasn't lying.
So the process for this, it's not really much more than a typical process to get this done. Step 1, engage the architect and civil engineer. You're doing that anyway. But that's definitely the first thing to do to make sure that you qualify for this bonus. And those are the parties that are going to get the bonus done for you at the end of the day. Step 2 is submit an ERSA plan to the Philadelphia Water Department. They're going to actually make sure that you qualify for the green roof bonus. They're going to want to see that to obviously get the green roof approval during your zoning submission. So Philadelphia Water Department's the people that control kind of who gets this bonus and who doesn't get this bonus. And they generate the standards for the green roofs themselves and also do the monitoring and all the inspections afterwards. After you go through that and get the water department the approvals that you need within zoning, you have to do the same thing during construction documents. They also require the details for the green roof. They're not crazy, but most civil engineers have done this before and can kind of guide you through what details are needed. We have done it as the architect as well, but in most cases, it's easier for the civil engineer to do that, as they do most of the site work and stormwater management anyway. It kind of falls within their purview. During construction, you will have to have inspections to make sure that you are installing the green roof per the details. And Philadelphia Water Department will come out as well to inspect to make sure it's maintained during this. And Rachel can kind of touch on that later on, you know, with the time frame and how long this kind of stays on your property. How much does it cost is always the big question, right? It's what everyone wants to know. Civil engineering fees, variable, I'll say. Usually what they're doing is around the same price. You might see an upcharge of 10 to 20% for a green roof condition. But again, negligible. Additional structural framing costs, you know, obviously it adds weight to the roof. So there's a little bit usually beefier framing on that roof. Again, fairly negligible. 5 to 10%, I would say, up cars and framing costs, just had to throw a number out. And then cost of the green roof, you know, we've gotten a few numbers. It's a plus or minus 18 a square foot. The system can, depending on what system you go with, can change that number though, and what company is installing, as most things.
And keep in mind too, one of the questions I always get when I say it's $18 a square foot, it's you have to pay for the roof first, and then it's an additional $18 on top of it. So keep that in mind. It's not just $18 a square foot and get you the green roof with you. So.
No, that's a good point. So when you're doing your pro formas, it's not $18 a square foot; it's 18 in addition.
I think just also just to touch on the deed restrictions that Scott mentioned. So the city does require that you execute and record a deed in compliant with the city's law department requirements, which basically requires the green roof be constructed and maintained at a minimum in accordance with the manufacturer's guidelines where applicable, and with the water department standards for the life of the building. And that allows the city to inspect the green roof or demand proof of continued compliance with those requirements. And I did check with Scott to make sure that they are still doing that. So you are required to have a deed restriction.
Great. All right, let's keep it rolling. All right, to the second one, mixed income housing bonus.
So this is a newer one that I don't know that a lot of people have taken advantage of. We've certainly brought a couple through. And again, this is a as of right bonus allowed. Basically, this was to incentivize mixed income housing and the inclusion of affordable housing. When the legislation first was getting passed, I believe it was like last October or something, they were trying to make it mandatory. It ended up being sort of voluntary, and again, is sort of a, here's what we'll give you if you can give us this. So you can either provide affordable housing, and we'll go into those details, or a one-time payment in lieu to the Housing Trust Fund, and we'll go through kind of the calculations, which are for RM1 to CMX2.5 based on square footage of the lot, and 2 levels based on if you're doing low income or moderate income. And you get, from the more you pay, you get a better of a bonus, either 25% or 50%. So, and for everything RM1 to CMX2.5, you get an additional 7 feet in height. So it's a density bonus and a height bonus. You don't have to take both. So maybe there's projects where the density makes sense, but you don't really need the height for whatever reason, or vice versa, but you get both. So we'll go through a small example, but that's sort of the gist of the mixed income housing bonus. What are the requirements? So at least 50% of the gross floor area must be residential if you're going to be providing the units, or doing a payment in lieu. If you're just doing a payment in lieu, you can do less than 50% residential. There's other criteria for projects that exceed that, but if you have a specific project, we could talk about that offline, but here are the general guidelines. If you're providing the units, at least 10% of the units have to be in either the low income or the moderate income level. The code goes into great detail about how that's calculated and what they look at, but essentially low income is what's called 50% of area median index, which is based on HUD standards. And then moderate income is 60% area median index. So those are the 2 main points. And those come with different financial criteria based on HUD.
And obviously they change every year. So it comes out every year. And it's based on a formula, but so we put it together in spreadsheets. But it allow you, so every year you want to look at it, it will change, likely increase every year.
I'm asking where to get the HUD standards. So they should be on HUD's website. However, I'll tell you from experience, and Adam can certainly tell you, that the format in which they lay them out leaves a lot to be desired. So we've actually spent a lot of time creating specialized charts that can show what the rental rate is versus the ownership rate. But HUD's website.
Yeah, and maybe you want to add to that, because I think one of the biggest questions we get, the way the code kind of reads, it seems like it's always talking about ownership. So we get that a lot of times. Are these area median index, are these requirements for just ownership, or can they apply to rentals?
So the code provides for both rentals and ownership. Originally, I think a lot of people were always geared towards home ownership. However, the code does specify what the requirements are specific to renters and specific to owner-occupied units. I didn't go into grave detail about it because, again, it's project specific, and I would probably have everyone falling asleep with those details. The one thing to know, though, if you're providing the units, is that you have to provide them for not less than 50 years. So I think that's where we've seen a little bit of a transition from most developers or people who are really entering real estate. They're not as comfortable with the 50 years for a number of reasons. I think there's investor issues with that and other long-term considerations, but it's 50 years. So a lot of times people are doing the payment in lieu. And what is the payment in lieu? Again, it's a one-time payment. Basically, you take the lot area multiplied by either $20 or $24, depending on if you're doing the moderate income bonus or the low income bonus. And that's the amount that's calculated to pay into the housing trust fund. If you do the $20, which is the moderate income, you only get a 25% extra housing unit density bonus. If you pay $24, you get a 50% increase, and both of those can be stacked along with the green roof. Or they can be separate. So say you have a smaller project that's only 1,440 square feet. This may be a better bonus for you. And like I said, we've seen more people do a payment in lieu because of the 50-year deed restriction.
And also makes a lot of sense, because when you're looking at that payment in lieu, most people are looking at that as, hey, how many additional units am I getting, and what's that payment? What am I scooping additional units for in price? I personally can't recall someone that's went for the 50-year, and I think, to Rachel's point, it's because there's issues with it. No investor wants to put a term on their deed for 50 years when you might sell it, and someone might look at that as a means to not pay top dollar. So I just think that's something that the city can improve upon to leave something more desired for developers if they are just going to provide it, as opposed to just paying into the fund.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right.
How to calculate. So this was an actual project that we did in Brewery Town. The lot was 1,480 square feet. Without the bonus, we were able to do 4 units as of right, with 38 feet in height. With the bonus, we chose to do the moderate income bonus, which was 25% extra density, getting 1 additional unit. And the calculation was $20 times the square footage of the lot, which was 1,480, which was a payment of $29,600 plus the additional 7 feet in height. So it's now, and I think this is under construction right now, it's a 45-foot tall building, 5 units. And so that was an actual project. And obviously for this client, it made sense to have the extra unit, the extra height for only $30,000. It's a one-time payment.
Mm-hmm.
And that was,
it's a no-brainer at that point. Anywhere in Brewery Town, you're picking up 1 unit for $29,000. It used to be a lot, but now, that's a steal.
Goes to Scott's point too, right? Like, you have to know the area in which you're building, because there are places that look for bigger unit that don't necessarily look for dwelling, or you just can't get the rate. So where $24 might not make sense, even at a small number, this 20 to get 1 unit makes complete sense in Brewery Town.
And to Scott's point, the ceiling heights, get a lot taller, which is nice if you're going to do smaller units. I live in 800 square feet, but we have 12-foot ceilings. So it feels a lot bigger and nicer of a space. And then obviously you can add value as far as, what your rents would be.
Mm-hmm.
What the steps are. So your architectural plans must clearly indicate the bonus. So it has to be obviously shown on the plans with the with your elevations, and obviously has to be included in the chart that's provided, but it also has to provide for the calculation if you're doing the payment in lieu. If you're doing a payment in lieu, it has to actually say, lot area is $14.80. That's $20 times, which is $29.60. You have to actually write that in, because we went back and forth with L&I over that, and they want it specifically on the plan so that they have it locked in with what the amount is, I believe. I think that's the reasoning behind it. So that's important. And then obviously your application has to clearly specify it. Obviously, the chart has to show the height and the amount of density. And basically the way that the process has worked, and I know that it's still working that way now, but a little bit more efficient through Eclipse, is there's a form which we'll go to on the next page, which has to be filled out and submitted with the zoning and use application. That you don't have to submit the plans right away. I think now with Eclipse you should, but before when we were doing it, all this manual running around, you would end up having to pull the plans back anyhow. So you submit everything, you get the form to the Planning Commission. They review the form and they review your plans to make sure that you're in accordance with this, with what you specified. They then send that form back to L&I with their signature, your signature, and then they process it, over the, as of right with a review of the plan. So there's the only additional factor is this form. It has to be signed, and then once you get, which is right here, it's a pretty basic form, as you can see. The location, zoning permit application number. That's why it has to go to L&I first. I think right now the way that they've been doing it is it doesn't need to go to L&I first. Planning will sign it as long as they can review your plans to make sure that what you're providing is accurate. Number of units, number of height, payment, your contact information, and then obviously it's signed. This one was signed by me, but and then the city. And then lastly, once you get your zoning permit, you have to sign a contract with the city of Philadelphia that essentially says that you're qualifying for the moderate or low income housing bonus payment in lieu, and that you agree to pay X amount of money, and obviously some other legal language, but it's maybe a 2-page contract, so nothing scary. And lastly, you cannot pick up your building permit without submitting that check to the housing trust. It has to be a bank certified check, and make sure that you make a copy of that check. It actually gets sent to the Revenue Department, so it doesn't go to L&I, it doesn't go to the Planning Commission, it gets sent to Revenue. So just make sure that you take a photo of it and before you send in that kind of cash.
Yeah. All right, great. I think we're moving on to the last one, the fresh food market bonus.
Yep.
Exciting.
Scott, you want to take this?
Yeah, this is my least favorite bonus.
No.
There's only 3, so this one ranks number 3.
Yeah, this one's 3.
All right.
This one's been around for a while. It's been changing though. I'll say a few times within the code, so it's important to check the most recent code, honestly, to make sure that you're right on this. Basically, it provides extra height and density if you provide a fresh food market on the ground floor of your development. This was really put in place because there's areas of the city that have a food desert, have low access to grocery stores. It's hard to get them in places. So this was kind of developed by the city to try and get that in place. The one thing to remember is that no other fresh food markets may be in operation within 1,000 feet. So that's something that they're going to look at, but you should also need to make sure you look at before you plan your entire project around this, and just make sure there's nothing in the area. They don't want 5 grocery stores next to each other, obviously, with tall buildings. It's not going to work. But this is the most generous height bonus that is given. It is a 15-foot additional height. And I think a big part of that too is because grocery stores need the additional height within the commercial space. You really can't have a 10-foot floor to ceiling for a grocery store. It's not really going to work for a great food market at that point. The first 10,000 square feet of floor area in the fresh food market is exempt from off-street parking requirements. So they also allow that to be a little bit more lenient from that standpoint. But the thing that really goes into play on this is that you have to realize how much ground floor area are you able to allow for a fresh food grocer to come in? If you have 500 square feet, that's just not going to work. Obviously, I think the requirement is 2,000 square feet, the minimum that needs to be required on the ground floor for them to actually grant the bonus. But you do have to actually put this in. So it is something to make sure that you have lined up in the beginning of your project, and that you can actually deliver on.
I think for CMX2 and 2.5, you have to have at least, I think you have to have 2,000 square feet of ground floor being commercial or whatever it is. So yeah, to your point, if you have a way smaller lot size or way smaller building, that this is not going to make sense.
Cool. So I guess we'll move on to my favorite slide, which.
Oh yeah, stack them up.
So there's 3 bonuses. So like a short stack of pancakes, we can stack them up on top of each other. Scott, talk a little bit about that. Talk about maybe some instances where you've actually stacked bonuses to, achieve some additional value.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, most of the stacking, in my opinion, works really well on large properties. So if you have a really large property that's RM1, CMX2, you might want to look at stacking these things up because you have the building area that could actually make this work. But you're most likely around a 75% density bonus. So, I mean, you could look at green roof plus moderate. You can look at green roof plus low income bonus to get there. There's ways to look around it. And then there's instances where you kind of look at, do I do moderate and green roof, or do I just do low income and then skip the green roof altogether? And those are all kind of things that are good to play around with to see which one makes better sense in your instance. There's not an answer where one makes more sense than the other necessarily. Sometimes it does make sense to go low income instead of moderate plus green roof and vice versa. And we've looked at scenarios where I've seen it both ways, but it does create a pretty substantial value in the amount of density that you can increase from a buy right scenario.
I would just add that when you're doing this, like it says there, you calculate each bonus kind of individually. So you first have to calculate that green roof bonus, round it down, and then you can multiply by the density. So like each thing, it essentially equates to, if you're doing low income, a 75% increase, but you're not doing a 1 times 7.5 on the whole calculation. It's going to actually come in lower than that.
The stack, just continue stacking them, so you get the first answer, second.
But but make sure you finish your calculation, you round down before you stack to the next one. And I think, but if you want to share again, Scott, I believe with the grocer, you said that certain things might not can't be stacked. So if you just want to elaborate quickly, which can't be stacked together.
I don't know if you can stack the fresh food market.
You can't stack it with green roof.
Yeah, I think that.
I don't know that anyone has tried to stack it with. I don't think you could stack it with 7 feet in height. I think what it says is you can get up to 15 feet in height. So if you want to, if the goal is to get 7 feet or 15 feet, I mean, you want to get 15 if you're going to do a grocery store. I think the density bonus, as far as moderate income, is a little bit of a separate evaluation.
Yeah, but they don't want you to add an additional 22 feet in height to an RM1 property. No.
The other thing worth noting too is, like, one of the good things about these is they're all as of right. So these do not require variances. And a lot of times you may think, oh, well, I don't want to do a payment in lieu. But I've spent time with clients, and I know that we have as a team here, and we've gone through and said, hey, listen, this payment makes more sense, the units you're going to get and the time frame, versus the money and time you're going to spend through the variance process. So it's always something that you should have your legal and design team evaluate, because you may go in thinking you need all this density variance-wise, and you actually can end up paying less money and spending less time on one of these bonuses that also helps contribute to the city in some way. So that's important to evaluate.
We're doing great on time. It's 2:45. We have 15 minutes left for questions, and we actually do have some really good questions being asked, some of which I don't know the answer to. So glad I have the experts.
You should take them.
I could try to wing it, but let's just get into the questions portion. All right, so we have a question from, let's see, let's start with Justin. Let's throw a wild card in because we didn't prep for this. Justin John asked, can you go over the art bonus?
As you say, I'm looking it up. Yeah, we can. I've done it on one project, actually, that was a land bank acquisition project that we did that included putting a mural on one of these sites. You have to actually pay in a certain amount of money to do it if you don't provide the mural. And if you provide the mural, I believe they give you some bonuses. If you want to take other questions while I look this up, I'll come back to it. I've seen it in one project, literally one project.
It is. It's for CMX 3, 4, and 5, I believe. So
yeah, I was going to say that as well. It's something we'll probably discuss in the second phase, because again, it's something that applies to larger properties.
It's specifically a floor area bonus. I believe it's 100% additional floor area ratio, if I remember correctly, but that could change between 3, 4, and 5.
Another question from Jennifer. This is interesting. This is going to be an all experts hands-on. Would you add smaller properties in Wissahickon watershed to best prospects because of enhanced stormwater management requirements?
Yes. Absolutely. That's a great point. There's overlays that hit a lot of these properties. Wissahickon is one of them, that you might get hit. Any property over 5,000 square feet in those instances have to do stormwater management. Right. So where the standard is typically 15, when you hit an overlay with a watershed, it drops down to 5. That changes from time to time as well. But yeah, that is a great point.
It's a point we actually discussed, right?
Water management, it makes sense to start to look for that green roof.
Yeah, we discussed this actually when we were creating this project, and we do it a lot of times, and Scott put some valuable insight. If you have to put if you have to go through a pretty significant stormwater management system, a lot of those costs are going to be associated anyway. So it seems like the green roof would really make sense, that bonus, because since you're already sinking the money into that water.
The reality of the situation is, managing stormwater is a great thing to do. Unfortunately for your development, you're not really seeing a value add in it. No one's going to pay more because your stormwater is managed on your site. It's just not going to happen. So if you can get some sort of benefit, from obviously doing that system and developing more responsibly because you're on an overlay, awesome.
So while we're on that topic, there's a question from Shrey. Can you just maybe elaborate a little bit how the height bonuses and low income density work on overlay districts? So maybe not ones with the watershed per se. Are there any conflicts with, if there's a height restriction on an overlay district, how that might be affected? Like which comes first? Maybe elaborate on that question a little bit.
That's a really good question.
I have not seen this anywhere. Typically, I will say the overlay district takes precedent.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah, I think that's a safe conclusion.
Yeah, I think if there's a specific project you have in mind where you would qualify for the height and density bonus for the mixed income housing, and then there's an overlay, that it's something that you'd probably want to discuss with the planning commission. But I do think, to Scott's point, generally overlays, but sometimes the overlays are very specific to certain parameters, borders. So you'd want to be sure that you meet those criteria. But I always run those type of questions around the planning commission to see if there's kind of a workaround.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, specifically, I know there's instances where, like, for instance, Main Street Manayunk, our office is there, so I know it well. There's a 38-foot height restriction, even though most of it's zoned CMX 2.5, which is a 55-foot height restriction typically. The overlay surpasses that, brings everything down. So I would count on that. But yeah, I agree, Rachel. Going to planning commission is always worth asking the question, just to be sure.
Wow, the thousands of projects between us, and we got one that's almost a stumper. That's pretty good.
Well, and the only other way to get around some of these overlays is you have to get a variance sometimes.
Yep.
So there's no workaround with that. But I think if you're trying to provide moderate income housing or low income housing, that it's definitely worth asking to see if there's some of these things. As the legislators draft legislation, they don't always think about how everything applies in every specific area, because the city is so vast and each council member is responsible, the 10 district ones are responsible for their area. So there are some overlays are in some areas and not in others. So, and then they do some blanket legislation like the mixed income housing bonus, which is all areas qualify for it. But it may not make sense in some areas. So it's a great question. And, I would be interested to see how it plays out.
This is kind of this might be an opinion or maybe some ideas. John Geating asked, City Council's anti-poverty plan was interested in making this bonus even more appealing. You mentioned the 50-year thing as a challenge for the on-site units. What other challenges would improve it from your perspective, or anybody else on here who's used it? I would just say, the 50-year, I just don't know who or where that number came from, if anyone here knows. But I mean, 50 years, it's, you're passing that on through generations almost at that point. I just think it's too egregious to ask a developer to slap a deed restriction on a building for 50 years. It's just too unknown.
Yeah, I think that probably if I had to ascertain what they were thinking at the time, it was probably with respect to very large buildings, very institutionalized players. Because like you said, the typical, and I would say 90% of the people who are developing in our city, that 50-year is you don't even have to go into the topic. It's a deal breaker right there, because how do I know I'm going to be around 50 years or the property, and it makes it a challenge to sell, and there's just so many things to think about. So my opinion was it's completely on institutionalized.
One of my favorite, just an easy math problem, right? They say, if I give you $1 million today, or I give you a penny and double it every day for the next 45 days, which one would you take, right? It's always, I was like, oh, the $1 million, but the compound interest, keeps generating.
Oh, math.
Math, right? Real estate appreciates every year.
Right.
It does. So let's just take a low appreciation of 2%. That 50-year deed restriction, no way. And that's where it's there. I could see it being a 10, maybe 15-year.
They tried to do that originally, 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, Rachel, we were constantly in council offices talking about the 10 to 15 year.
Yeah.
Which I think even was kind of tough for people. I think 50 years is a deal breaker. I think sometimes, again, depending on how much involvement there is with the legislation and the legislators while this process is going on, sometimes you get the same kind of people in a room and there's not additional input for people to say, hey, listen, that literally makes no sense, or what about this? And again, it's voluntary. So I think that their thought too was that, well, we gave people 2 options. So if they don't want one, they can. I think the other cool thing that would be worth considering is maybe not always for a height bonus, because I know that some neighborhoods don't really like height, especially on middle lots. It can look weird. But maybe instead of height, allowing for providing less open space, open area. I mean, traditionally with RM1 sites, you don't really need that much rear yard unless you're doing parking or something. But to maybe be able to do a little bit more lot coverage to balance that out instead of height, or maybe it's a combination of all that. So you can only get so much density on one site unit, size-wise. The height, I think, is interesting in Philadelphia. Some people are okay with it, some people are not, and maybe there's other ways where you don't really need a 9-foot rear yard for an apartment site.
Yeah. But I would also state, when we were having these conversations before that legislation passed, 10 to 15 units is more swallowable, and even though it was sometimes a deal breaker for certain clients, there was actually chances of low income and mixed income properties being built, where with this new one, we're talking about money going to a fund that hopefully is, going to then turn into low and mixed income. But that's what Rachel can tell you from her experience. That may not necessarily be where those funds are going. So the city absolutely needs low and mixed income housing, and more of it. And I just don't see how the 50-year was going to, help with that, unless that money is specifically going to more properties being built.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's see if there's any other questions. We have 5 minutes left. Could you stack the density but not the height?
For which bonus?
Questions from Isaac. Is he still on here? Yeah, Isaac. Isaac asks, could you stack the density fresh food and green roof. So no, I
No.
learned that today. You
No.
can't stack those two.
Yeah, not those.
Let's see. I think we got it.
I think he's changed it. He want fresh food and mixed income.
I think we talked about that. We've not seen it done before. You only at a most could get 25% extra density. So it doesn't specifically say in the code where it specifically talks about that you can't stack the green roof for, an additional 25% plus the fresh food for 25%. I've never been asked or seen a project through where they're doing a greengrocer credit and the extra density. I would argue that you should be able to, because it's not specifically in the code. But again, I haven't seen it yet.
Let's do it before they lock it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, let's end on time here. This is great. I got up, obviously, the link that's been sitting here for a few minutes now. Please submit questions next week. We want to get them to Alan ahead of time, before he's on, just so he can review them and be prepared to answer and be as efficient. Rach, I think, what's he with us for 30 minutes, 20 minutes?
Yeah, we'll try and drag it out, but we want to be as efficient as possible. And, I think I'll share with you one of the reasons I wanted him on the call, besides I feel lucky enough to have a relationship with him, is that, I think at this time it's really going to be interesting to hear from some real leadership in the city, to hear about, their views. He's obviously was very involved with helping the banks and the mortgage forbearance programs and getting them to work through some deferment programs, and just also to hear from a business perspective for someone who's also going through this, maybe at a different scale or level, but to hear kind of how he envisions it. And then as we go into budget discussions, so think about questions you want to know. They don't have to do with COVID or any of that stuff. It could be other general questions, but make sure you send them in so that we can. And also, don't get a cat while you're doing a video. He's like literally sitting on the. So we really look forward to that, and we really want to be able to monopolize our time as much as possible.
Great. Well,
thanks, John. John goes, so much cat action on the webinar.
Next week, maybe we'll try to all bring our pets.
Yeah, and again, if we didn't answer any of your questions, like we had mentioned, we have a place to submit questions, and we will get to them on the next calls.
Great. Well, again, thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate it, and looking forward to seeing you all next Thursday at 2:00. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.